All right, welcome to Disruption Digest, the podcast to explore the weird, the wonderful world of AI in plain English. I'm your host, Jamie Hugh. With me, as always, is my co-host, Jarrett Miller. What's going on, Jarrett?
Nothing much. Excited to be back for another week of Disruption Digest, and I'm excited to go over the topic that you've uncovered for this week, a major report on the status of AI as of today out of Stanford. Excited to see what this report says and what you've uncovered and your key takeaways from it. But before we do, I guess we should start off the podcast the way we always do with our JobsGPT question of the day. So for those of you unfamiliar, Jamie has created a custom GPT that has the personality of Steve Jobs, and we ask it questions each week, and it responds in a way or with an answer that it thinks Steve Jobs would give on this particular question. So Jamie, I had the privilege of asking a question the first week. Do you have any questions in mind you'd like to ask Steve Jobs?
Oh boy, it's my turn, is it? All right, well, let me hit it with this question. Which fictional world would you choose to take a vacation? So I'd be very curious.
Okay.
I mean, Steve would have, I think, many opportunities to go anywhere in the real world, but given a fictional one, be very curious to see what he says. Or at least
A vacation destination even not accessible to one of the world's wealthiest men.
Right, exactly.
Okay, he says, I'd pick Hogwarts from Harry Potter. Imagine the look on the Sorting Hat's face, trying to decide between Gryffindor for my courage to revolutionize industries and Ravenclaw for my relentless pursuit of innovation. Plus, I could finally learn a spell to get my iPhone battery to last a whole week. A week? I'd take a day without having to recharge that thing.
Even with magic, getting to a week on an iPhone with a battery is a tall order, shall we say, Jarrett? Oh my God. That's hilarious, though. That's hilarious. I'm not sure I would put him in Gryffindor. I think he's more a Ravenclaw, to be honest with you. But, well, he's a great seller, so he's got a bold personality. Who knows?
Depends on which company you're working for, I guess, and
yes.
Whether or not he's your enemy. You might put him in Slytherin.
Indeed.
All right, so let's, Jamie, let's go ahead and get into this paper that you found and kind of read into. So what exactly is this paper, and what are some of the topics that you'd like to discuss that you found?
So every year, Jarrett, Stanford releases what is essentially a overall report on the AI industry, and it's called the AI Index. And so they just released it for 2024, and it's incredible, right? It's a wealth of knowledge, but the problem is it's 502 pages, so it's a beast, and it's bedtime reading. So what we've done,
bedtime reading for like 2 or 3 months.
Indeed, right? There's enough material to keep you around for a while. What we've done is picked out 4 areas in this paper which we think are very interesting and worth a discussion. And so we're going to talk about it, do a bit of a deep dive. Those areas are 1, advances in large language models. 2, global investment trends, which I think is very interesting. 3, industry adoption, which is, I think, top of mind for a lot of people. And then 4, AI incidents. So great technology, but has things gone wrong? And if so, what do they look like? So we'll have an exploratory conversation about each of these and what the paper has to say. So with that being said,
let's go ahead and kick it off with advances in the AI language model. So what exactly is it saying here is the latest advancements and the trends here?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so now I've got this report shared on the screen. Great question. And this is one of the first eye-catching graphs in this paper. And it's talking about the state of AI performance, especially when it's benchmarked against humans. So you can see that in this graph, it's performance relative to humans baseline as a percentage on the left here. On the bottom is a time trend. So we're looking at how AI is improved over time, especially when it's against the 100% human baseline. So what's kind of interesting is, for the most part, things are obviously trending towards the human baseline, but they're doing so at different rates, right? So you can look at image classification. It's a very shallow curve. I mean, we crossed that boundary, that threshold, back in 2015. But if we look at
Mm.
the very latest one, which is competition level mathematics, which is this turquoise line here, is coming. It's not quite there yet. So we're not quite there in terms of human baseline, but it's attacking it at a much more violent angle, shall we say. So advancement
Mm.
in this particular area is considerably faster. All in all,
And
it does suggest that we're getting pretty close or approaching baseline performance across the board. Anyway, I'll pause there. I want to get your thoughts.
so would you say that for each new topic that's explored in AI, that angle of attack towards the human performance metric, it's getting steeper and steeper? And would you say, I mean, my assumption is that it's because each one of these new topics it's exploring is building off a previous topic, so the new advancement isn't that big of a stretch. Is that safe to say?
I think that's definitely part of it, for sure. And, one of the biggest unlocks of the last couple of years, should I say, I don't know if that's a great word, unlocks, but one of the biggest advancements has been GPT, right? And so the whole benefit of GPT is, if I make improvements to the model, then it can benefit all the different areas in terms of how it's being used, not just that very specific model in one particular use case. I can extend it for pretty much everything else. So I suppose it's building on the work of others, isn't it? I mean, you're getting some massive improvements across the board. But I think what's interesting is, once we've crossed that 100% threshold, things start flattening off. And so I'm not really sure what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's interesting that the AI isn't smashing the performance of humans. It's just barely exceeding the performance. I'm wondering if that's because these AI models are trained against other human inputs. So whatever humans have created, that's what these AI models are trained on. So could it be that there's a threshold or a ceiling as to what these AI models can do? It can only be as good as the best human that's ever done this particular task, and it won't actually exceed that and exceed the best human until AGI, maybe?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't know what the benchmarks are. I think that probably would have a significant impact in terms of understanding why this flattens off. And again, this is highly, I'm going to say questionable, but there's a lot of interpretation to this data, right? What defines human baseline? Do they average all humans? Because I can tell you, different humans have very different levels of performance when it comes to any of this stuff. So somewhat questionable to what this really is. But the trend, I suppose, is what they're trying to convey, is we're getting better, which makes perfect sense.
It looks like logic and math is still the most challenging thing to these AI models. Any comments there?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if you think about these models, right, these are large language models. They're good at everything to do with language, and that's the foundation. And we know that reasoning, logic, and maths, sorry, Jarrett, are incredibly difficult for these models. And there's a lot of potential promise that is based on that being advanced moving forwards. So what I mean by that is, if you think about autonomous agents, which I think is probably where we need to go, where the next big iterative jump is going to be, that requirement for those agents to be functional and to be good is they need to be able to have great logic, great reasoning. And we're not just quite there. So once we cross that boundary, I think it unlocks a lot of potential.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, what about the AI and global investment trends?
Yeah, great question. So let's have a look at that one. I'm going to switch over. And this is a very interesting looking graph. I didn't expect this, right? So on the left is total investment in terms of US dollars in billions. And again, it's a time chart. So we're looking at from a perspective of from 2013 all the way up to 2023 over the last 10 years or so. There's a breakdown in these bar charts of the different types of funding. But what's really, really obvious and worth the discussion is this thing peaks in 2021. So the growth rate is somewhat exponential, goes all the way up to $337 million in 2021. And despite all things to do with inflation and everything else, the trend has now gone back down, right? So all the way back to 189, which is actually less than 2020. Very interesting.
Well, it's especially interesting because I don't feel like AI was really making headlines until early 2023. So the fact that it peaked back in 2021 and has been steadily declining is a very interesting trend.
Yeah, I mean, I think this.
Do you know why that might be happening, or does it say anything about that trend there?
It's a good question. I have my suspicions, right? So if we have a look, I mean, this is more to do with the general economy, I feel. We know that in 2022, interest rates rose, and then the cost of money grew substantially from pretty much a very exclusive, a very rare 1, 2, 3%, where money was basically free. And, in terms of investment and growth, it was something you had to do to be competitive. And afterwards, we're now into a world where we're back to 7%. If you look at mortgages, all the way back to 7%, either way, the cost of money is much higher. It's gone back to the status quo. And I just think that has made an impact in terms of investment. It's still a very hot area. And I think people recognize the importance of this, but this probably reflects the change in interest rates and the cost of borrowing. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I 100% agree on the interest rates and the cost to invest in these type of tools. I wonder if it also has to do with this. How did you phrase it earlier in the talk about unlocking of these OpenAI models, where now the moat to create some sort of application or technology is so much lower or so much shallower than it used to be prior to these large language models being made public and more widely adopted. So is that lack of an AI moat becoming an issue for AI investment?
Wow, that's a great question. Right. I didn't really think about that. Yeah. So to your
Before
point,
you'd have to spend
you
just spend a lot of money and time creating your own AI tool. Essentially, I mean, I would assume much more from scratch, and now it's just much easier to do.
Yeah. I don't know if it would change the overall dollars. Maybe it would, but I do think that is a factor here, right? Because to your point, it's very difficult to compete in the frontier model space because the cost is just enormous, and so very few companies can afford to do so. And so I'm wondering, while typically there's a lot of small investments in all sorts of different companies to spread the risk, if you're a VC firm, a PE firm, you're going to spread your risk a little bit. But now there's only going to be very few companies that might be worthwhile, right? So OpenAI, Anthropic, a few others that are leading the race. So then the question becomes, where are you going to put your investment dollars? If it's not going to be competitive against those companies, then it's not worthwhile. And if you are going to be competitive, but your moat is really shallow, to use your point, then is it worthwhile? So some really interesting consequences, I suppose, from the AI world.
So are these investment dollars being more concentrated in fewer and larger investment deals, or is it since these AI models have come out, or is it still pretty spread out?
I think, the mantra has always been in these investment strategies, go big or go home. And looking at this, it's more like go niche or go broke, right? If you think about it. So, yeah, because you can't compete in the big spaces anymore. It'll be really, really challenging. So if I had to guess, I think you're right. I think you'll have less. Certainly in the mainstream race for better models, you're going to have less competitors and bigger investments.
I think we should put that saying on a T-shirt and sell it to VC firms. Go niche or go broke. VC
I had another.
CEO probably.
Yeah, that could be a business, Jarrett. That could be a business right there. I had another question. I had another question for you. Do you think they're using AI to invest in AI?
Ooh, I would not think so. Remember, going back to our earlier discussion, it doesn't do complex thinking very well. It might like
Hmm.
simplify some of the analysis, or maybe even some of the research. Um, just it might, yeah, simplify some of that analysis to present you with data. But
Yeah.
I would highly doubt that it's anywhere close to using AI to invest in AI to find other AIs. All right, Jane, what about the topic of industry adoption? This one's pretty interesting to me. I'm usually pretty interested in AI use cases within industry and within companies. What can you tell us about what the paper says on industry adoption?
Sure. So there's an entire chapter on this, and I think a lot of very interesting conclusions that we can draw from the data. So this is a chart from McKinsey. They looked at essentially a share of respondents that they were quizzing people in companies, share respondents who say their organizations have adopted AI in at least one function. And again, we see the left being percentage of respondents, and it's against time. So we can see that in 2017, adoption was pretty low, right? So only 20% of respondents said they were using AI in at least one function. And then it flattened off to 2019. Things were looking promising all the way up to about 55, 60%. But interestingly, Jarrett, it's flattened off, hasn't it? So if we look at the last couple of years, it's remained steadily between 50 and 60%.
And I guess what could you say that's very shocking to me, because AI has been in the headlines for the past year and a half now, year, and there wasn't a steep uptick in AI adoption. I mean, I know this report is from 2023. What do you give as to the reasoning behind why there hasn't been a steeper increase in AI adoption?
This is puzzling to me. It really is. I really expected this to be not flat, anything but flat, to be honest with you, Jarrett. And the only thing I can really think of that would make any sense is it does take time for businesses to analyze and figure out this new technology, right? So, like you said earlier, the big craze of AI didn't really kick off until 2023. 2022, we had the whole ChatGPT thing taken off, but I don't think people really understood the true power and the potential until a couple of months in. So it's just going to take time. And one of the things I think is quite interesting is for an organization to adopt AI, that suggests a top-down approach where management is saying, hey, we're going to use this. Whilst I think what's happening in reality is, well, we know for a fact that AI has tremendous productivity benefits, right? I mean, there's many, many different papers and research done on this. So we know that it's the case. So what's probably happening is the adoption is probably more bottoms up, where workers and individual contributors are using AI, and they're not doing so because management is telling them to use it. They're doing so because it is advantageous for them to do so, because it gives them a productivity increase. Either they can spend less time and feel less pressured, or they can spend the same amount of time but get more work done. And then again, from a perspective of promotions or pay rises or other things of that nature, is advantageous. So maybe this is a reflection, because this only really truly captures the top-down approach.
One hypothesis I might have is, again, going back to that unlocking idea, the status of AI tools has remained, at least to my knowledge, relatively stable. There's only been small incremental changes in new abilities until last year, whenever OpenAI whenever these large language models came out. And that has been a huge unlocking and step change and functionality. And it's people are so there's just now beginning to be these new tools that are highly useful and advantageous for companies. And from what I've seen, with this new unlocking of this new technology, it comes with it a requirement to have your data ready. And there's a few prerequisites that you need before you can actually use these tools and adopt these tools. And so a little bit further on, I saw this report that the biggest jobs in AI that companies are hiring for right now is around data engineers, AI engineers, but mainly engineers. And so that kind of tells me that people are getting their, or companies are investing in AI around getting their data ready. And then potentially later on, after that data is ready, they can start to adopt AI tools and have more AI use cases.
Yeah, and I tell you what's interesting to build off your point, right? So if we look at this second chart that follows, here's a breakdown of different use cases. These are the top AI use cases by function. And we can, first of all, we can see that most of these are related to the customer experience, either customer service or sales and marketing, which I find very interesting. But even in the most common one, which is this contact center automation piece, the adoption rate is pretty low, 26%. And to your point, I do think there are prerequisites that have to be in place for a successful deployment and successful implementation. And it's going to require data. It's going to require the data to be in position for this to be fully utilized. So maybe that's part of it. And there's probably other pieces as well, but yeah, it's very interesting.
It's also interesting that, I mean, I would think that a contact center AI has been around for a while, and it's pretty, to me, it seems pretty widely adopted. Maybe it's because I deal with typically with companies that do adopt it, but it's only 26%. I think that adoption rate is still that low. Like what are the other 74% of the companies that haven't adopted yet? Why aren't they adopting it?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, this thing will get rectified pretty quickly, because if it offers a competitive advantage, which we know it does, then as a decision maker, you're either going to adopt it or you're going to die. It's very, very easy. And we know that AI has some tremendous business benefits, so it shouldn't really be much of a decision. Many of the issues seem to be a lack of understanding of what it can do. I think that's probably the majority of it. And let's be honest here. I mean, this is a brand new technology, right? So are we being too aggressive? I mean, are we just being in a bubble? Yeah. So, I think it's very interesting that it is only 26%, but we have to reflect on the fact that it does take technology a little bit of time for propagation.
Jamie, are you surprised by any of the use cases that are up here on this chart that seem to be more the top adopted use cases? Or on the flip side, are there any use cases that you're like, this should be a no-brainer use case, people should be adopting this more, but they just aren't?
Yeah, there's probably one on here, which is personalization, right? If we look at that one, quite frankly, I expected this one to be way higher, way, way higher. And the reason is I think AI has tremendous benefits when it comes to personalization. So if you think about customer experience in general, there is a trade-off. So if you have great personalized experience for your customers, it's just going to take more effort and more time. And often that's not worth the cost. So the power of AI enables both. You can have really personalized interactions because you can empower the folks in your company that are speaking to your customers to understand exactly and to get a really bespoke personalized experience based on each individual customer. And that's just not possible without AI. So quite frankly, I expected this to be higher, but maybe again, it's just going to take time, I feel.
We can go on to the final takeaway you had, and that's AI incidents. Can you define first off what an AI incident is, in case people aren't familiar, and then talk about what it is that they showed in this paper?
Yeah, so basically, as far as this paper's defining incidents, these are notorious or negative news reports of things going wrong with AI. And it's worth talking about because this is a great technology, but there are many, many issues and many problems, as you would expect with any technology. And so what this graph is charting is the number of these incidents against time. And so to your question, what are these incidents? They very helpfully given us some examples. So one would be, if you remember, there was this controversy of deep fake versions of Taylor Swift that were obviously very unwanted, shall we say. Another would be, I'm trying to be nice here. Another would be Tesla apparently had a video where somebody was driving a Tesla, it recognized a pedestrian, but it failed to slow down at a crosswalk. So obviously that has some negative implications about their self-driving ability, which is obviously not good. And then the final example this paper gave is the use of DALL-E and other chatbots for romantic use cases, which again can be troubling depending on how you look at it. So these are all things where AI is doing something that turns out isn't so great or cause some controversy in the news. And if we go back to the chart, we can see that this is actually growing, which probably doesn't surprise anyone. But what's interesting is it's growing quite linearly, would you say, Jarrett? I mean, I'm looking at this chart. It looks pretty linear to me. Yet I would have expected, because AI adoption has not been linear, I would have expected this to track and trend and to fit in exactly with adoption rate. And it's not.
What do you see as the potential reason why it's not tracking adoption rate? Like, I would think that there's an equivalent ratio of number of uses versus incidents per year, or whatever the metric is, but it seems like it's not following that at all. Do you have any ideas to why that is?
Again, I think we can take a stab at a guess, or we can't really be 100% sure. We just don't have the available data to understand this. My suspicion is twofold. One, as these incidents are created, then the folks that were developing AI were taking note and generally fixing them. So just because more people were using them does not necessarily mean the number of bad incidents were being created at the same rate, because they were able to fix them. And, you know, if you look at incidents, they're going to follow probably like an 80-20 rule, where most of the incidents are only 20% of the problem. And so if you can solve those, then you're less likely to going to get mass media attention. So that's my first guess. And then the second one is, I think there's probably less propensity for these incidents to happen once first piece of news gets out. So for example, once that news about Tesla gets out, we're probably not going to get too many more news articles around the same type of topic, because with news, people look for novel things. And if it's not novel, if it's happened again, unless there's a significant trend and there's a story about that, the news is probably not going to get reported.
I have this debate with people sometimes around Tesla and the self-driving cars and the incidents that happen with the self-driving cars. You know, as self-driving cars continue to be used and adopted, it's just inevitable. You're going to have incidents with them where it gets into a wreck. I've seen articles around that, and you know, there's going to be an incident where it kills somebody, or where there's a fatality. But I point to the opposite side, where it's like you don't see these reports where it's saved how many thousands of lives, and you only see a couple reports where there's incidents, which gets so much bad press for these incidents that have just grab headlines. So I think eventually self-driving cars will be much safer than humans, and eventually it will be considered irresponsible for you to actually grab the wheel and take control over the AI self-driving car. So how safe, I pose this question, how safe do you think AI self-driving cars have to get before it's considered irresponsible for you to grab the wheel yourself?
Again, another great question. So I would pose it this way, Jarrett, which is, one of the reasons Now, if we were completely logical, right? Let's say our entire society is very logical, then you would imagine the moment the average accident or death rate of self-driving cars were below that of humans, we would all switch over by definition, right? And so
Mhm.
it'll be very irresponsible if you were driving yourself if self-driving cars were better, if we're perfectly logical, but we're not. And so I think there is an element of we want to be in control of our own destinies. So for example, if I make a mistake, I want to be the one that said, you know what, it was my mistake and I owned it. But
Mhm.
if something or someone else created that mistake, then that's going to create a lot more outrage. And I'd rather have control of my own destiny. So with that in mind, with self-driving, I would imagine it's going to take quite a significant number of safety and track record and everything else for most people to be convinced. There's going to be a lot of people that will need to wait, and it's not going to be a equal. This has to be probably an order of magnitude safer. I would like to think so. 10x, you know. So even if it's crashing half as often, I still think most people would question it in their minds a little bit, and so it's not going to be a fair comparison.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on. I think it needs to be 10x safer because people will overestimate their ability to be a good driver. I mean, that's what we do. Forget what exactly principle that is, that people overestimate their abilities. But people typically don't overestimate their abilities 10x. So I think once you can show a 10x improvement of self-driving cars over the human, then it will be considered unsafe for you to take the wheel yourself versus letting AI handle it.
And I would say this
Go ahead and
also,
start
Jarrett,
there.
which is, we're talking about something that has great consequences. So with
Mhm.
driving, there is potential for some real serious things to happen: death, dismemberment, and so on and so forth. Not sure why I mentioned dismemberment, but here we are. But the point is, there are some really, really serious consequences that's going to influence that threshold. I feel if we're talking about something that's considerably less dangerous, so if we're talking about automating spreadsheets or something, getting AI to do spreadsheets, and we're tracking error rates between humans and AI, that threshold is going to be a lot closer. So you're not going to have to wait for 10x for people to say,
Mhm.
you know what, I can let AI take control of my Excel spreadsheets. That's going to be a lot sooner. But because driving, there's real possibility of injury, then that threshold is going to be higher.
All right, Jamie. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to, one, find this paper, and then two, reading the 502-page document and coming up with your own thoughts around, or presenting us with what was the most interesting topics to you and taking time to do that. I was most intrigued by the industry adoption, or I guess lack of industry adoption.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to see if that improves in the coming years as new applications become better and use cases become more wide and more applicable.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this. But look, appreciate the discussion. Great chat. Thank you for spending the time to do the deep dive. And yeah, very interesting as always. Appreciate it. I'll speak to you next time. Thanks, Jarrett.
Yeah, looking forward to the next discussion.